Tell me what that's a picture of? Those of you who aren't medical. What is it? Dendrites? What do you think it's a picture of? Neurons. Yeah, that's a picture of the brain. Actually, the neurons in the brain. So today we'll be talking a bit about the diet and the mind, and we'll deal along with a couple of things dealing with the diet and the mind. First of all, we're talking a bit about brain fog. Who's ever had brain fog? You know what I'm talking about? Okay. Also, I'll talk a bit about diet and depression. There is some good info about diet and depression, and also diet and dementia and Alzheimer's. So we'll touch on a few things. We won't go into great detail, but we'll try and give you a good idea of how diet can impact those particular things. First of all, let's deal with the diet, and just a quote here. It says, the brain and peripheral nervous system, the endocrine system, the immune system, and indeed all the organs of our body and all the emotional responses we have share a common chemical language that are constantly communicating with each other. So your body and your brain and your organs are all communicating in various ways with each other. Okay, let's deal with brain fog first of all. Now, brain fog is, you may have experienced this in yourself. It says, you ever had difficulty concentrating, get momentarily confused, fatigue, a lot of fatigue without any reason, forgetfulness. Who forgets lots of things sometimes? Who has trouble remembering names? Some people have trouble remembering names. I have trouble sometimes remembering names. Mental exhaustion, losing your train of thought, not having the right words. Now, you're in the middle of a sentence and you're searching for a word. Now, what was that word I was going to say? Slow thought processes and reaction time, and trouble paying attention. I think all of us at some stage or another experience this and sort of wonder, now what's wrong? Am I going out of my mind or what? And so it's a very common thing for a lot of people. So what are some of the causes of that brain fog, what they call brain fog? Actually, brain fog is not a medical term. It's just a term that people have used for these different symptoms. Okay, what are some of the causes of brain fog? Lack of sleep. Who gets enough sleep here? Sometimes. I know I don't get enough sleep at times, so that's one thing. Unresolved stress. Who has stress? Lots of stress sometimes. And so stress itself is not necessarily bad, but if it's unresolved, that's when it becomes an issue. Poor diet. Junk foods, absence of healthful foods that can lead to brain fog. A lack of exercise. When we know, as a dietitian talking to patients, one of the things that I find is people sometimes can follow a diet without too much problem, but when you talk about exercise, that's one of the more difficult things that people find to do consistently. Overuse of alcohol and caffeine. Lack of hydration. You may be simply having brain fog because you're not getting enough water. Poor gut health. Your gut microbiome is unhealthy. Too much screen time. That includes like computer, TV, your phones, lots of things. And so too much screen time can lead to brain fog, and I've experienced that myself. Now, in my work, I do have to do a bit of computer work with charting and stuff like that. And after a while, if you sit there for an hour or so doing all that stuff, you say, oh my, you sort of start to space out. Not space out, but you lose your concentration. So a bit like brain fog. Okay, let's talk a bit about diet, various aspects of diet and how it can affect your brain in terms of the brain fog. And so this is an article from the RMIT, and it's about junk food. Who doesn't eat junk food here? Who has eaten junk food once in a while? I guess I should say it that way. I think we've all done that. So junk food can get you high. I'll read some of this out. It's kind of interesting. The The brain has a reward system that hardwires us to engage in behaviours that we find pleasurable, like eating tasty foods. When we eat junk foods, the reward circuits in our brain activate and release a chemical called dopamine. Our brains become overwhelmed by the pleasure of these rewarding foods and in response the brain adapts and makes more receptors for dopamine. It means a greater amount of junk food is needed to get the same kick. So the small amount to begin with becomes a greater amount because you don't get the same amount of pleasure. The same way an addict develops a tolerance to drug. So our brains are hardwired to seek out and find rewarding foods. And most of the junk foods are high in fat, high in salt or sugar, and they give you immediate hit as far as flavour, don't they? Whereas you're chewing on something like an apple or an orange or some other type of thing, it takes a little while for you to get the taste out of it. Junk food grabs our attention and makes us impulsive. This is one of the other things that junk food can, in terms of brain fog. We rapidly learn that these fatty junk foods are delicious and we turn our attention drawn to them when we see them. To resist, who's ever gone past a bakery? What do you smell when you go past a bakery? And you start thinking, that sounds pretty good. Those donuts look real good, or something like that. So I can see the reason for that. To resist temptation, we need the major control center of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, or the frontal lobes. They're the major control or the executive function of the brain. Junk food, there's another thing that junk food can do to your brain. It can inflame your brain. Now this is called neuroinflammation. It sets off a self-perpetuating series of events relating to more inflammation and can damage brain cells called neurons. So eating a lot of junk food can eventually damage your brain cells. Australian researchers recently showed that as little as 5 days on a diet of sugary drinks, cakes and cookies cause an increased levels of inflammation in the hippocampus. We'll be talking a bit about the hippocampus a little later on. People with damage to the hippocampus report being hungry all the time. I know when you've had something like who's ever had chips? No, the hot chips. Do you find that you're constantly eating those chips? You can't really stop, can you? In many ways, and I think it's designed that way to make you eat more. The hippocampus, inflammation in hippocampus. Now, we'll talk a bit about the hippocampus a little later on. People with damage to the hippocampus report being hungry all the time. The hippocampus has been found to be important in receiving fullness signaling messages from the gut. So eating a junk food diet can create a vicious cycles of damage to the brain cells in the hippocampus, and this damage causes people to want to eat more. Junk food shrinks the brain's learning capabilities. The hippocampus is the memory center of the brain, and researchers have found that people who eat lots of junk food don't perform as well as those who eat healthy diets in simple memory tests. So it doesn't say much good about junk foods, does it? But you notice that one of the growing, if a restaurant opens up in town, uses either McDonald's or Golden Arches or a Hungry Jack's or the Kentucky Fried, etc., etc. And so people like those foods because it gives that immediate hit in terms of flavour. Junk foods laden diets can be shown to reduce neuroplasticity, which is essential for us to form new memories and learn new things rapidly. The birth of new neurons, or neurogenesis, happens throughout life in the hippocampus. And so we'll talk a bit about the hippocampus a little later on, but it doesn't say much good about junk foods, does it? And so I think when we're gone on a trip somewhere and we're tempted, okay, junk food is quick. It's quick and nasty. And unfortunately, it doesn't do much well for our diet. Okay, this is a quote I've used before. The stomach is closely related to the brain, and when the stomach is diseased, the nerve power is called from the brain to aid the weakened digestive organs. When these demands are too frequent, the brain becomes congested. when the brain is constantly taxed, there is a lack of physical exercise. Even plain food should be eaten sparingly. So you can see this sounds a bit like a description of brain fog, doesn't it? So, what do we do about brain fog? Diet. Now this is really interesting. You know, there was in the time of the Bible, there was junk food. There was junk food. Now let's give an example there. About 600 years before Christ BC, there was in Nebuchadnezzar, he was a Babylonian king. He took captives out of Jerusalem and he took them back over to Babylon to become students in the University of Babylon. And they're going to spend 3 years in the University of Babylon, and it's going to teach them how to become administrators in the whole kingdom of Babylon. And so Daniel and his 3 friends, there were four of them, they were amongst these captives that went over to Babylon. And what happened is that Daniel saw that, and his friends saw that the food that they were going to get was not very good types of foods. The king said that to the guy who's in charge, I want you to feed these people from all the food that's presented at my table. The food is presented at my table. So this was the best food in the kingdom. Absolutely the best food in the kingdom. And so just to read what it says here, the king appointed them the daily provision of the king's delicacies, of the wine that he drank, and 3 years of training for them, so that at the end of that time they might serve before the king. So they're going to have some training at the University of Babylon. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine that he drank. Therefore he requested that the chief of eunuchs, that he may not defile himself. And the chief of eunuchs said to David, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your food and drink. Why should he see your faces looking worse than the young men of your age? You would endanger my head before the king. So if they looked like they were malnourished or anything, be off with his head. So Daniel said to the steward of the chief of the eunuchs, it said over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days and give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Now, vegetables wasn't just vegetables, it was a diet of a variety of different types of grains and legumes and vegetables and fruits. So that was the term that they used for that. Well, in one of the versions it says pulse. Let your appearance, and so he said, give us a test of 10 days eating this diet. It's a plant-based diet. And then at the end of 10 days, if we don't look better than the other guys, we'll go back to the king's diet. And so let our appearance be examined. So he consented with him in this matter and tested them for 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. So at the end of 10 days, these guys were on a plant-based diet compared to the other people who eaten all the delicacies of the king's table. They looked fairer, they looked fatter, they looked more healthy. Those had just 10 days on this diet. That's not very long, is it? Thus the steward took away their portion of delicacies and the wine which they drink and gave them vegetables. Okay, what happened at the end of 3 years? So they're going to be in the University of Babylon for 3 years. So at the end of 3 years, the king himself was going to examine them to see whether or not the education had been effective. And he says, and at the end of the days, when the king said they should be brought to the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. Then the king interviewed them, and among them were none found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they served before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in his realm. And thus Daniel continued to the first year of King Cyrus. So that's a bit like a scientific study, isn't it? That they did. And at the end of the 3 years, they were, in terms of their functioning, in terms of how how they, they're cognitively and all the rest of it, they did a lot better than the other guys who were in the same university. So they were at the top of the class. So that was a simple matter. They ate just water to drink, and they had a very healthful plant-based diet. That's all they did. And it made a lot of difference in how they performed at the University of Babylon. Okay, so diet. Just another thing I came across when I was looking at this, who's ever heard of Chris Pratt? Chris Pratt is an actor. None have heard of him? Not into famous people. Anyway, he was in a number of movies, one called Guardians of the Galaxy, a whole bunch of other movies and stuff like that, Jurassic Park, all that stuff. Anyway, I came across the Instagram post, and he, at the beginning of 2019, he said he was following a Daniel diet. I thought, wow, okay, that's kind of interesting. Then I looked into it further, and he looked at the book of Daniel in the Bible, and there's a time in Daniel's life where he put himself onto a restrictive diet, and in terms of a plant-based diet, because he needed to have a clear mind. And similar to what he was doing when he was in the University of Babylon. But Chris Pratt was doing the same thing at the beginning of 2019 to sort of getting a bit of a health kick. So it's quite interesting that even today, the diet as found in the Bible is still relevant. Okay, so things to do as far as brain fog goes. Regular exercise, reduce the screen time. In terms of reducing screen time, what's a good idea when you are having issues when you have to do a lot of screen time, like on the computer for work, is after about an hour, get up and walk around, get a drink of water, take a break from it. And you probably do a lot better with that way. Adequate sleep. Now, what's the optimal amount of time of sleep we should be each day? Probably, they say 6 to 8 hours, don't they? And some people it's a little different. And stress reduction. Now, some of the dietary stuff they're suggesting here, a good source of antioxidants in your diet. And high antioxidants foods are your vegetables, your fruits, nuts, whole grains and seeds. Diversity is the key. So eat the rainbow. We may have heard of that term, to eat a rainbow. Now, eating berries at least 2 or 3 servings a week, greens around 5 times a week. This is a similar diet to what's for Alzheimer's as well. Next, fiber seems to be a critical factor in brain health. Fibrous foods include vegetables, cruciferous ones like broccoli, cauliflower, kale, particularly good, and fruit. Fruit is best consumed whole rather than in the form of a juice. Whole grains are a good source of fiber, and make sure you don't have too much in the way of refined fiber, refined grains. Another critical element in terms of to help with the brain fog is to have your omega-3 fatty acids. You ever heard of the omega-3 fatty acids? You know what they are? Okay. So having a good source of those each day is a good idea. Now, some people have fish as a source of, like an oily fish as an omega-3 fatty acid. Other people, there are other plant sources of omega-3 fatty acids. There's chia seed, seaweed, flaxseed, walnuts, and soy. So they're also good sources of the omega-3 fatty acids. But fat is also important for the brain. So what they're suggesting here is a good fat source is your avocados, your nuts, and olive oil. Especially your extra virgin cold-pressed olive oil is one of your better ones out there. So that's just some ideas in terms of the foods in terms of helping with brain fog. So let's switch gears a little bit. Now, any questions about brain fog at all? I know it's not necessarily a diagnosable medical condition, but it could be evident of some other condition that might be going on in the body. Okay, let's talk a bit about dementia now. Now, who's had some exposure to dementia of some kind? So you may have friends, you may have a auntie or grandfather, etc., who are dealing with dementia. It's becoming very common. Now, the most common form of dementia is Alzheimer's disease. It accounts for around 60–80% of dementia cases. And in the United States, it's the 6th leading cause of death in the United States. And in Australia, it's the 2nd leading cause of death in Australia. So that's Alzheimer's disease. So it's quite a sobering thing when you think about it. It's a very high death rate. And so there's been a lot of research done on dementia and Alzheimer's particularly. They're looking, some of the drug companies are trying to put together medications to sort of deal with that. From what I've read of the effectiveness of those medications, they're not as effective as, say, lifestyle changes. And so we'll deal with the lifestyle change a little later. But in dementia or in Alzheimer's disease, there's what we call the microbiota or the gut-brain axis. Now, this is there's a number of disorders that are associated when your gut is not healthy. And you can see here on the bottom one, there's neurodegenerative disorders, including multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's, are related to you not having a healthy gut. So that's one of the things that could be involved with the development of dementia and Alzheimer's. And there's a number of other conditions that are listed when associated with an unhealthy gut. And this is a busier slide, but it shows you some of a little closer look at the gut-brain barrier and at the gut-brain connection, and the importance of certain nutrients that are dependent on a healthy gut. What we call short-chain fatty acids, we talked a bit about those when we talked about the gut microbiome last talk. And also the gut is involved with the transmission or the production of neurotransmitters that are used by the brain. And so that's some of the things that when you're having a healthy gut, you're able to develop a healthier brain from having a healthier gut, because there's an intimate connection between the gut and the brain. Okay, so some of the side effects of dementia or Alzheimer's, we'll talk more about Alzheimer's, memory loss, difficulty with language, confusion, getting lost, wandering or not knowing the time, mood changes, feeling anxious, agitated or depressed. You may have seen some of your relatives where you've seen that experienced when they're experiencing this. Withdrawal from social activities or work. Trouble with tasks, having difficulty with familiar tasks or learning new things. Hallucinations or delusions, believing things that are untrue or feeling paranoid. Impulsive behaviour, undressing inappropriately or using vulgar language. And I've heard of that with people who are in the full-blown Alzheimer's. Formerly they were people who would not swear and do anything like that. When the Alzheimer's developed, that whole thing changed and became quite aggressive. Sleeping disturbed, sleeping more during the day or being restless at night. So there's some of the symptoms of Alzheimer's. And in your going back to the previous one, you notice there at the bottom there's what they call the hippocampus. This is a comparison of a healthy brain or normal brain versus a brain of a person with Alzheimer's. You notice here at the bottom there the hippocampus. Now, hippocampus is involved with memory. It's very important as far as memory goes. You notice with a normal brain that is quite a good sized hippocampus, but you notice in the brain for the person with Alzheimer's is shrunk. And that's one thing about the hippocampus is that it can regenerate. It can create new nerve cells or create new brain cells. So that's why the hippocampus is very important. We'll talk a bit about that a little later. Okay, so what causes Alzheimer's? Diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, midlife obesity, smoking, poor diet, stress, and lack of social interaction or loneliness. So I think to some degree we've all come across people who have issues with these particular disorders, haven't we? And so a lot of what they're suggesting with the treatment of Alzheimer's, you treat the underlying cause of the Alzheimer's. So if a person has diabetes and it's not being controlled, treat the diabetes, you may have better success when treating the Alzheimer's. If a person has high cholesterol, then their cholesterol under control, etc., etc. And so dealing with those issues first may help in the treatment of the Alzheimer's. Let's now deal with what the role of the hippocampus. I mentioned the hippocampus as being very important in memory. It's involved in short-term and long-term memory. It's involved in learning, spatial and navigation and behaviour. It helps convert short-term memory to long-term memory. It's believed that Alzheimer's may have affected the hippocampus first. That's why a person who's developing Alzheimer's will start to have problems with their memory. And creation of new brain cells or neuroplasticity. I'd like to read you a story. This was an actual occasion. This is a person called Henry Mollison. Now Henry had a cracked skull in an accident. His childhood and adolescence were marred by seizures, blackouts, and embarrassing episodes where he lost control of his bodily functions. In his late 20s, Mollison was desperate. He turned to a renowned neurosurgeon, Dr. William Scoville, who had a reputation for conducting risky surgeries. At the time, doctors thought that the mental functions were strictly localized to corresponding brain areas. Schofield had successfully used partial lobectomies, an operation that severs the connection between parts of the brain to reduce the seizures in psychotics. So he decided to remove Henry Mollison's hippocampus. So what happened? A part of the brain associated with emotion but largely unknown functions. At the time they weren't sure what the function of the hippocampus was. To some extent the operation succeeded. Henry Mollison became, as Henry became HM, as Henry became known, no longer had seizures. His IQ improved and there was no change to his personality. So far so good. But his memory was wrecked. He couldn't remember most of the last decade and couldn't form new memories either. He would either take multiple meals in a row, forgetting he'd already eaten, and watch the same movie over and over and over again because he couldn't remember seeing it before. His life was long Groundhog Day. You ever heard the term, the movie called Groundhog Day? That was a bit like his life. And so his memory was, HM's memory was curious. He couldn't form new memories, but he could find the bathroom. He couldn't remember facts, but he could remember how to do certain things and could improve his performance over time. The hippocampus is needed to transfer memories into long-term storage. Without the hippocampus, HM couldn't form initial impressions, but they could form initial impressions, but they would evaporate quickly. And so after but a few days, participants, so that's what happened to HM. So HM became the subject of neurosurgeons or neurologists all over the world, and they were fascinated in discussing, in studying his condition. Now what happened to HM? He died at 2008, aged 82, with the most studied mind in history. Over 100 neuroscientists had worked with HM during his long life. And they didn't stop when he died. HM's brain was preserved and scanned before being cut into over 2,000 slices, which is kind of gross, but anyway. So it illustrated the importance of the hippocampus, and when they removed the hippocampus of HM, they didn't realize the repercussions of that. And so hippocampus is one of those areas of the brain which is very important in terms of dealing with Alzheimer's. Okay, so how do we treat Alzheimer's? How do we treat that? Now you can go to the doctor, get your scans, and you may be given a medication. And from what I've read of the medications, not as near as effective as what you would think. But there is a diet, there is a number of studies have been done that treat Alzheimer's with lifestyle. One of those studies was done by Dr. Dean Ornish. About 40 years ago, Dr. Dean Ornish developed a diet to reverse heart disease, and he found that people with heart disease were able to have their heart disease reversed. And so in the last 5 or 6 years, I think it was, something like that, he developed a diet for Alzheimer's. And so what did he do? So what he did, he had, with this diet and also with this lifestyle, he had reversal of Alzheimer's, which is unheard of in a lot of circles. And so this was people with in the early stages of Alzheimer's. And I've even heard with people in the later stages of Alzheimer's, they can also benefit from the changes in lifestyle. And so the diet was whole foods, minimal processed plant-based, low in harmful fats, refined carbs, alcohol and sweets. Ornish and his colleagues at the Preventive Medicine Research Institute conducted a study and found that lifestyle interventions significantly improved brain function in people with early Alzheimer's disease. The study participants who adhered closely to the diet and lifestyle program saw the greatest benefits. So the more you got on board with the program, the better off you were. And so what did the diet consist of? It consisted of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, green tea, legumes, all your bean family, non-fat dairy products, tofu and other soy products, and egg whites, and limited amounts of alcohol and non-fat sweets. Some people may find it difficult to follow for the long term because of the restrictions on fat, refined carbs, alcohol and caffeine. But what they found with this particular diet, that they had a reversal of the Alzheimer's when they did that. So what was the rest of the program that Dr. Dean Ornish had? He said, stick with a brain healthy, heart healthy diet, limit amount of sugar and saturated fats you eat, make sure you have plenty of fluids, fruits, vegetables and whole grains. Stop smoking, maintain a healthy weight, stay socially active and stay mentally active. And so my mum is 94 and she likes to maintain pretty mentally active. And she beats me at Scrabble all the time. But I may not be I'm probably a bad Scrabble player, but that's all right. But I gave her a crossword when I was down there about a couple of weeks ago, and she goes, fills out the crossword, no problem at all. And so her mental faculties are pretty well right on. And I said, Mum, how do you do that stuff? I don't know how to do it. It takes me days to do a crossword, so anyway. Stay mentally active, get more quality sleep, limit to alcohol consumption. If you drink alcohol, stick with no more than 2 drinks a day. That's what they're suggesting. What I would suggest in terms of alcohol is to abstain from alcohol altogether because of the issue with alcohol and cancer. Cancer is a carcinogenic substance. Alcohol is a carcinogenic substance. Protect your head. You may have heard of football players and soccer players, etc., who have developed the early dementia earlier on in life than what you would normally think, because of the fact of the impact of the sport on the brain when they got impacted with when they're playing their games of football, etc. And so that's the Dean Ornish program, and he found there's a reversal of the Alzheimer's with that. There's another one. They developed a diet for Alzheimer's, for mental health, or for diet called the MIND diet, and this could prevent Alzheimer's. This is also a diet that was designed by various researchers, and this is a combination of a DASH, what we call a DASH diet, which is a diet that was developed for high blood pressure, and a Mediterranean diet. Who's ever heard of the Mediterranean diet? Okay. So what they found with this diet is they were able to, I'll read you the blurb on it. Combination of the Mediterranean and DASH diet for treatment of dementia, the group between 65 and 60 and 75 years at risk of dementia and other forms of cognitive decline were put into lifestyle intervention, plant-based diet, exercise, intellectual stimulating brain exercises, etc. Scored 25% higher on tests assessing mental function and 83% higher on executive functioning scores, the ability to get things done on the MIND diet. So what is in the MIND diet? Again, it's a bit similar to Dean Ornish's diet, and also it's a bit similar to the other diets, the Mediterranean diet. So there's 1 serve of dark green leafy veggies a day. So in the dark green leafy veggies, you've got your lettuce or your cruciferous vegetables, your cabbage, cauliflower and all that stuff. You've got your berries, at least berries 2 times a week. Your blueberries particularly, your strawberries, all your berry family are very good in terms of for your brain health. Nuts, 5 servings a week of nuts. Whole grains, 3 more servings of whole grains a day. Beans, around about 4 servings of beans a week, and extra virgin olive oil. So again, you can see it's very similar to the diet we mentioned earlier for the brain fog. But they found with that particular diet that people were able to have like a significantly improve their brain function. Okay, just another diet this is called the Smiles diet. Now this is a diet that they use for people with depression. It was done by the Deakin University down in Melbourne. And there was 60 people who had moderate to severe depression. And they divided them into 2 groups. One group was a counselling group and another group was a diet who put on a Mediterranean diet. And they did that for 3 months. And so what happened at the end of 3 months? After 3 months, they had their scores tested, their depression scores tested. And about 1/3 of the participants in this group ended up meeting criteria for significant depression remission. Only 4% of the social group met the same criteria. So a third of the participants of the intervention group had significant remission of their diet, of their depression, simply by following this Mediterranean diet. Again, a plant-based diet. So it's quite fascinating to see all that what we can do now when we're comparatively healthy. If we're starting to eat healthily, more fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, etc., we do our brain a good service, but also we do our hearts a good service, and also in terms of other chronic diseases. And this is a quote that sort of encapsulates a lot of this. It said, grains, fruits, nuts and vegetables constitute a diet chosen by our Creator. These foods prepared as simple and natural manner as possible impart a strength of a power of endurance and vigour of intellect that are not afforded by a more complex and stimulating diet. The Bible also has principles for diet, and in the Garden of Eden, what we call the Edenic diet, in the Edenic diet in the Bible it says they ate a plant-based diet, and the plant-based diet includes of seeds, your grains, your fruits, and and later on was the vegetables. And so that's what they're suggesting, that's what the Bible is suggesting, that's a diet you can't go wrong with, and research is bearing that out today. In Isaiah 55:3 it says, eat what is good. And Proverbs 23, even eating of foods that are healthful, eating too much of them is not a good idea. It says, when you sit down to eat with the ruler, consider carefully what is before you, and put a knife to your throat if you're a man given to appetite. In other words, if you're a person who's inclined to eat a lot more than what you should when you go eating out somewhere, put a knife to your throat. In other words, practice temperance. Do not desire his delicacies, for they are deceptive food. And so there's some principles there from the Bible that deal with diet. And I think that's when we look at all this evidence and all this evidence from not only research, but also from the Bible, I think it makes sense to sort of look at our diets. When we're looking at our diets, how much away fruits and vegetables are we eating? How much of the whole grains? How much junk food am I eating? And look at that and say, you do an evaluation. Okay, where can I change in this particular area to eat something more healthful? And just to finish up, this is a quote here from a book called Ministry of Healing. It said, the relation that exists between the mind and the body is very intimate. One is affected. When one is affected, the other sympathizes. The condition of the mind affects the health to a far greater degree than anyone realized. Many of the diseases from which men suffer the result of mental depression, grief, anxiety, discontent, remorse, guilt, distrust, all tend to break down life's forces and to invite decay and death. Disease is sometimes produced and often greatly aggravated by the imagination. Many are lifelong invalids who might be well if they would only thought so. Many imagine that even the slight exposure will cause illness, and the evil effect is produced because it is expected. Many die from a disease the cause of which is wholly imaginary. So it's quite an interesting quote there in terms of the power of the mind. Any questions at all?
When you say dementia, I've just recently heard of vascular dementia. What, is that just another form of dementia?
I think the vascular dementia deals with when the blood vessels in the brain are clogged with plaque, and also can deal with the carotid artery as well. Anything that limits the supply of the blood to the brain.
So plant-based diet could maybe reverse that?
That's what Dean Ornish found, that he was able to, when he found, about 40 years ago, he did an intervention trial with people who've documented heart disease, who had blockages in their heart, and on his diet those blockages became less. And so it's a similar diet to what he used for his brain. And so I think the same principle is improve the circulation of the blood to the brain.